Thanks very much. Could we have the first slide, please? I'm not able to see the slides, so I'm just not sure if the slides are up.
They're up, Silvio. Yes, they are. You can't see those slides?
Yeah, I can't see them for some reason.
Okay, you're on your.
Okay, I can see them now. I can see
Okay,
them.
thank
Good.
you.
Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. Great. So we're a mature late-stage biotech company developing products for very large markets, and the products are based on off-the-shelf cellular therapeutics. We call them mesenchymal precursor cell-based products. These cells are obtained from healthy young donors. They're grown up into large batches, frozen, and then shipped through a supply chain from the manufacturing site, which happens to be in Singapore, to the warehousing and ultimately the end users in the US, Europe, and other jurisdictions. The cells are unique cells that have certain receptors on them. They're well characterized, that can be activated and respond to inflammatory signals that are present in tissues of very bad diseases that we target. And when the cells are activated by these signals, they release other markers that turn off the damaging immune cells that have activated them in the first place and that are responsible for destruction of the tissues. And that's fundamental to the disease states that we target. And we think that these cells have got a unique capability to improve outcomes, that improve outcomes that are otherwise not addressable with typical drugs. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of our mature pipeline. And as you can see, we have one product that's completed phase 3 and is now in the midst of negotiations with the FDA for potential approval. This is for a disease called graft versus host disease. And then we've got that same product is being developed for some very large disease states, specifically inflammatory bowel disease, that's ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, that's in phase 2, and also respiratory inflammation due to a variety of agents, including COVID-19, and that's in phase 3. A second platform is the one we call Rex Lemistrocel, that's in blue, and the products from that platform are being developed for severe chronic low back pain and severe heart failure. And all of these diseases that you see here are driven by severe inflammation, and we target the segment of patients who failed all other therapies. These are very, very large markets, unmet medical needs that, if successful, we have large blockbuster potential in areas that are totally underserved. Next slide, please. The first product that's most advanced and that has completed successfully phase 3 and is now in front of the FDA is for this severe disease called graft versus host disease. It is a major complication that affects about 50% of children and adults who have a bone marrow transplant for cancer. And so when you have treatment for cancer, the chemotherapy that cures the underlying cancer wipes out your immune system, and you need to have a bone marrow transplant to rebuild your bone marrow. Unfortunately, 50% of the time, the bone marrow from the foreign donor attacks you and kills you. As you can see here, there are actually more than about 12,000 transplants in the US a year, and 2,000 of them are in children. And unfortunately, when children get this horrible disease that attacks the skin, the bowels, the liver, the mortality rate approaches 90%, 90. Very, very devastating complication. And there are no drugs approved to treat this disease at all in children. Next slide, please. So across 3 separate trials that recruited over 300 children, what we saw, if you look at the bottom in the yellow in the 3 trials, each of them achieved a significant primary endpoint of day 28 response, somewhere between 64 and 69%. And in comparison, the 2 white on the left are control groups, where you see the control rates of these responses are of the order of 38 to 43%. These are significantly improved responses. But I think the more important point to look at is in the second row below in yellow, where the survival outcomes in these children are somewhere between 66 up to 79% survival. And again, that on the left-hand side, the controls have about a 54% survival. And the longer you go out, the survival of the controls, the worse it is. In fact, by about 18 months to 2 years, the controls only have about a 35% survival, whereas we continue to maintain the excellent survival that you see on the right-hand side. And what that means is for every 100 children that get this complication, if they're treated with standard drugs that are out there, even though they're not approved, the overall survival is going to be about 35% at 2 years, and we will be able to save 20 to 30 children out of 100 who otherwise would have died. That is a massive advantage, and it's the way physicians and the FDA and healthcare payers look at a treatment like this. Next slide, please. So we are in front of the FDA. We unfortunately had a hiccup with the FDA about 1.5 years ago, which delayed the approval. The experts in the field were pulled into a panel by the FDA called the ODAC panel, and they voted almost unanimously 9-1 to approve the drug 1.5 years ago. The FDA unfortunately said they wanted to see more information, particularly on manufacturing and on what's called potency assays. We've had several meetings with the FDA, and we're in a position over the next little while in the coming quarter to be refiling for the approval of the product. And we expect that if on refiling, if the filing goes well, that sometime in the second half of this year, we will potentially get approval, and we're planning to launch the product. We're building our own small sales force to be in a position to sell the product. We understand that it's relatively small sales force is needed because about 50% of the transplants in children are performed in about half a dozen major transplant centers across the US. We've had discussions with the payers, and we're talking about a very substantial reimbursement for a treatment like this. This is a very orphan indication. The payers pay substantially, and I think the ability to roll out a product like this with revenues towards the end of this year is substantial. And we take insights from the way this product is already behaving in the US market, in the Japanese market, where our partner has been selling it in Japan for the last 3 years, and we've seen already 30 to 40% adoption in the Japanese market, and we would expect to see the same sort of thing in the US market. If we go to the next slide, please. The next slide looks at the follow-on indication for this product, which would be for inflammatory bowel disease. Here you're talking about somewhere in the order of 70,000 new patients a year in the United States with this severe inflammatory colitis that is not responsive to any other drugs. Those are big numbers when you're talking about a therapy for Crohn's colitis. The biologic drugs that are out there today charge about $60,000 a year, and so it's a massive market potential. And we're working with lead investigators at the Cleveland Clinic that are running studies right now on these patients with the same product that would initially be approved for graft versus host disease. Next slide, please. And so the pilot data that were just presented at a major international conference, literally, I think about a month ago, was from the initial 12 patients who had failed every other drug and were treated with our cells by local injection into the inflamed colon. Next slide, please. The results were quite spectacular. What they showed was that all our patients with ulcerative colitis showed remission within 6 weeks, and all the Crohn's colitis patients showed either remission or at least substantial responses by 6 weeks. In contrast, the controls actually showed worsening of disease and are currently being evaluated to get treatment with our cells, having failed the other drugs as they continue to be recruited in the study. We'll be updating the market over the next couple of months with results of the rest of the patients who are being enrolled. And this this is a potential blockbuster if the results continue to show what we're seeing here, which is remission in the absence of responses with any other approved drugs. Next slide, please. Now, just shifting our attention to the other large area that we're focusing on with the second major drug, rexlemestrocel. I just want to touch on the back pain opportunity, because that is very simple to understand unmet need. How many of us suffer with severe chronic low back pain due to inflammatory degenerative disc disease? Well, I can tell you in the US, 7 million people have this specific problem diagnosed by MRI and refractory to almost everything that is out there, and there isn't much. And so this is a patient population that we think is totally underserved, but we've had some very, very exciting data in terms of durable, substantial reduction in pain for as long as 3 years from a single injection into the disc. Next slide, please. The basic problem is when you walk around on two legs, unfortunately, you create a lot of stress in your disc, which is that little gel cushion between two vertebrae in your back. And unfortunately, age and exercise and the daily stress of life result in compression, inflammation, and the inflammation, the immune cells that come into that disc space create influx of nerves, blood vessels, severe pain, and ultimately destruction of the disc. And this is a process that continues for about 10 years. At the end of that, you need something like surgical disc replacement or something called fusion. But for about 10 years, a large proportion of patients suffer greatly with this disease. And you know about non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and they don't work here. And otherwise, the only alternative is opioids. And in the US in particular, you're probably aware about the opioid epidemic, where people are taking opioids for lots of things, but 50% of opioid prescriptions are for these patients with inflammatory back pain. And unfortunately, because it doesn't work very well, they take higher and higher doses, and the side effect of opioids is accidental overdosing and death. And that's a real pandemic in the US right now as we speak. Next slide, please. And so in a randomized phase 3 study of 400 patients, you can see that at 12 months, we had a substantial and significant reduction in pain in red relative to the green, which is a saline control injection into the disc. That level of reduction in pain is very substantial. The green would be roughly what you would expect with opioid drugs. Next slide, please. But the most dramatic changes were in patients where we intervened with a single injection within the first 5 years of pain. And here you see even greater treatment benefit. Again, the red is what you should focus on at 12 months, about a 35-point reduction in pain from baseline. Just to think about it's a score that's called the VAS score, which is a score from 1 to 100, where 1 is no pain and 100 is horrific pain. So they come in with a score of about 70, let's say. And what you see here in red, that by 12 months, there's about a 35-point reduction from baseline. That's about, in other words, a 50% improvement in pain across all patients. In green, you only see about a 15-point reduction in pain at 12 months. And as I said earlier, that's about what you would expect with opioids. So this separation of pain reduction is amazing at 12 months. It's unheard of actually with anything that's out there. But equally as important, notice how far it goes, all the way to 36 months. So one injection gives you 3 years of substantial pain relief. Next slide, please. And more importantly, or equally as importantly, by 36 months, you see in red, 25 to 30% of patients who are on opioids at baseline have come off opioids altogether, despite the fact that they were told in this trial, don't reduce your drugs at all. In green on the right, you can see the controls, only 5% of them came off opioids. And so when we met with the FDA, this was a major and a striking observation that they took on board. Next slide, please. So we received feedback from our meeting with the FDA, where they agreed with us that one more study that replicates what I've just shown you in the first study pain reduction at 12 months in patients who have had pain for no more than 5 years would potentially serve as an approvable trial for the product. And so we're embarking on this program going forward. We understand what needs to be replicated in order to get approval. And this will be probably the most valuable application and the most valuable opportunity. It's a multi-billion-dollar market for Mesoblast. Next slide, please. And I think that's my last slide. So I'm probably just on time. If we
just on time. Thank you, Silvio. And we have lots of questions if you have time.
Sure.
Now, Mesoblast has a number of programs, and you've spoken about several of those programs. Which programs should investors be most focused on at the moment?
Well, I tried to put on the table what I think are the nearest inflection points, value inflection points for investors. So the pediatric cancer product is before the FDA. So that is likely to be the most value creative opportunity. And we would expect, as I said earlier, that once we refile our submission, there's a 6-month sort of maximum window of review. And if everything goes well, then we're in a position to have our first product on the market in the US by the end of the year. That is huge for the company. That is transformational. We've had a lot of volatility in our share price, and that's reflective of this opportunity. When we were close to getting approval about 1.5 years ago, our share price was much higher, of course. And then with the delays from the FDA, our share price has come down appropriately. And I think you'll see it again in terms of as we get closer to potentially getting approval. With respect to a back pain program, I think that is, is many times greater NPV than is the GVHD. The GVHD program provides a halo effect for the company because it'll demonstrate that we know how to get approval with the FDA, and we know how to get reimbursement, and we can sell. But I think the back pain product, the phase 3 program is being put in place as we speak, is tremendous value because that has a multi-billion-dollar annual projected sales opportunity. And the closer we get to that product reading out positively, the greater the value in the company. And I think I would point out that we made an interesting announcement yesterday. We brought onto our board a very, very senior person from the FDA. He retired in November after 10 years as the deputy head of the vaccines group inside the biologics arm of FDA. He was responsible in great part for the COVID-19 vaccines, and he continues to be the head of the World Health Organization. He's a chair of the advisory group on COVID-19. So his expertise inside the biologics group at the FDA and his knowledge base of how to navigate our first and subsequent products is going to be tremendous on the board. And I couldn't be more pleased that he's joined us. And, I think it's testament to the way the senior regulatory people in the US perceive Mesoblast as a serious company that's doing things the right way, by the book, bringing products to market with a brand new platform technology. We're pretty excited.
And just on that, you're appealing the FDA's decision on Resmetincel. I think that's perhaps how you pronounce it. So how long does an appeal process take in general?
Well, so you don't just appeal, you provide them with new data. And as I said, we are going to be resubmitting the new data in short order. Once you resubmit the new data, you're part of the same review process that you were in previously, but now they've got new data to evaluate. And that process then takes somewhere between 2 to 6 months. And so and companies go through these multiple cycles of review by the FDA all the time, particularly when there's a brand new technology. And as I said earlier, the expert panel who reviewed our clinical data recommended 9-1 that the FDA should approve it. So it's almost without precedent that when a panel like that recommends approval, the FDA doesn't go along with it. And they've asked us to do more work on improving the potency assays, which is sort of a manufacturing component, and which we've done. we've done that, and those are the data that we're going to provide to the FDA. So we're very confident.
There's actually, you've got some astute investors online here, because one of the questions is, what is the key piece of evidence in regards to potency assay? What is the key piece of evidence that the FDA wants to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. The key piece of evidence they want to see is that you have a potency assay in place that measures the potency of the product before it goes out the door from your manufacturing side, and that potency assay predicts clinical benefit of the product. And I can tell you that we've now got data that shows the potency assay that's in place predicts outcomes like survival, which is the gold standard ultimately. So if we can predict how this product improves survival, then we've got the right potency assay.
And I'll just switch over to back pain now, if you don't mind. There's a question here. What is the timing on the beginning of the FDA suggested clinical trial?
The timing is up to us. The FDA doesn't have any issues. They've already given us the green light to commence. So it's up to us. We're in discussions with strategic partners to commence this program. And I think we'll be updating the market in short order. But the plan is to begin in the second half of this year.
Excellent, thank you. So that's all we have time for. There's a number of questions. I'll shoot those through to you over the weekend. And if you could kindly answer those back to our investors, that'd be appreciated.
Thank you very much for having us.
A great story. Good luck out there, and we'd love to have you back on another time.
Thank you.